Viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following content is intended strictly for educational and entertainment purposes. What you're about to hear is a faithful recounting of federal courtroom testimony from the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, as originally reported by Intercity Press. Day 3 of the federal trial was already drawing intense media attention, but no one inside or outside the courtroom could have predicted what was about to unfold. In an unexpected and jaw-dropping twist, the prosecution introduced a piece of evidence no one saw coming, a previously unheard audio recording made by Prince. Yes, that Prince, just weeks before his death. As the voice of the late music icon filled the courtroom, the mood shifted dramatically. His words were calm, yet carried a haunted weight. He named names. He described exclusive parties. He detailed scenes he claimed to have personally witnessed, moments that allegedly occurred behind Diddy's closed doors. The entire room fell into stunned silence. But it was Diddy's reaction that shattered the illusion. The polished image he had crafted over decades began to unravel before the jury's eyes. His composure gave way to a furious outburst so intense that the presiding judge was forced to warn him of possible contempt. This wasn't idle gossip. This wasn't tabloid fodder or internet speculation. This was sworn, court-admitted evidence. From that instant, the tone of the trial shifted. Irrevocably, what Prince said and recorded in secret might very well become the turning point that topples everything. That morning it started like the previous two, routine and procedural. But there was an undeniable tension in the air. The buzz was sharper. The attorneys, usually measured in their movements, acted with a nervous urgency. Reporters filled the gallery quickly, exchanging hushed theories. Even courthouse staff whispered to one another, with one remark standing out. Today is going to be bad for someone. They had no idea just how prophetic that statement would be. Diddy arrived with his usual swagger. He wore a flawlessly tailored navy blue suit, his trademark smirk twitching at the edges of his mouth. He nodded toward the gallery, playing his role like a seasoned performer. His legal team was composed, whispering, shuffling papers, eyes straight ahead. Everything appeared routine, until it wasn't. A subtle change near the prosecution's table signaled the shift. Two unfamiliar tech specialists entered quietly, carrying equipment that hadn't been there on prior days. A small black audio device, a laptop, a tangle of discrete wires. One technician gave a slight nod to the lead prosecutor, who kept his gaze fixed on the table, refusing to meet Diddy's eyes. Something big was about to drop. Diddy, still unaware, appeared relaxed, perhaps even overconfident. But for those observing closely, the change in energy was palpable. Then the judge entered and addressed the room with an uncharacteristically somber tone. Today's evidence may provoke strong emotional reactions. I expect absolute composure. His eyes briefly settled on Diddy as he said it. That glance was not lost on anyone. And then, the moment that transformed a high-profile criminal trial into a historic courtroom spectacle arrived. The prosecution requested to present what they called critical new audio evidence. The defense jumped to object, visibly startled. No prior notice of this material had been given, they argued. It was ambush litigation, they claimed. But the judge had already reviewed the disclosure. It had been submitted correctly and in accordance with legal procedures. His ruling was swift and final. The evidence may be played. Then came the statement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. You are about to hear the final private recording made by Prince Rogers Nelson. Time froze. Phones slipped from hands. Journalists stared, fingers hovering above their keyboards. Even Diddy blinked in confusion, glancing at his attorneys as if to say, "What is this?" The prosecutor connected the device and pressed play. The voice that emerged wasn't the bold, glamorous icon the world had adored. It was somber, tired, frightened. "I'm making this recording," Prince said, his voice low and cautious, "because I don't know who I can trust anymore." A chill ran through the room. There was no mistaking it. This was no artistic performance. It was a confession, and everyone in that courtroom knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. In the now infamous recording, Prince stated that he had personally attended several private parties hosted by Diddy, events held at lavish properties in Miami, the Hamptons, and Los Angeles. What he described was far from glamorous. With haunting clarity, he painted a disturbing picture. Young artists separated from their teams, encouraged to drink heavily and take pills. Rooms with locked doors. Cameras concealed in light fixtures and furniture. No security personnel were permitted inside. It was a precise pattern, eerily similar to the testimony given by Cassie Ventura during the first 2 days of the trial. And unlike vague accusations or rumor, Prince's account was direct. He named specific names. He cited actual dates. One particular event, a December 2015 party in Beverly Hills, matched nearly word for word what previous witnesses had already stated. But what truly shifted the courtroom from curiosity to a palpable sense of dread wasn't just what Prince said. It was how he said it. Prince spoke with intent. He knew the weight of his words. And then came the statement that sent a chill down every spine in the room. If something happens to me, Prince said, this recording needs to go to the press or the police. Either one. As his voice echoed through the courtroom, Diddy's entire demeanor changed. Gone was the calm, controlled persona he had worn like armor. His eyes narrowed. His jaw tightened. The casual whispering to his attorneys ceased. He leaned forward, hunched over slightly, as if absorbing a blow. His face turned pale. Now, it wasn't just Prince who had the room's attention. It was Diddy. Jurors shifted in their seats, watching his every reaction as closely as they listened to the recording. Then came the line that cracked the silence. These aren't just parties, Prince said. They're traps. The room seemed to hold its breath. Prince's voice was so steady, so real, that between his words, one could hear his breathing. A woman in the back row wept silently. A reporter seated in the front dropped her pen. One of Diddy's attorneys reached out, placing a hand on his arm in an effort to calm him. Diddy flinched and pulled away. Prince's voice continued. He explained that he had once confronted Diddy directly. During an after-party in 2016, he had warned him, told him the manipulation and exploitation of young talent had to end. According to Prince, Diddy's reply was chilling. You might be Prince, but you're not untouchable. That line struck like a gunshot. Diddy reacted. His lips moved rapidly, whispering something to his team. One attorney snatched a yellow legal pad and began scribbling furiously. Another glanced toward the judge, possibly looking for a lifeline, any opportunity to object. But there was nothing they could do, no objections to raise. The damage was unfolding in real time, and no legal maneuver could stop it. As the recording moved forward, describing another event, this time a party in March 2016 involving multiple celebrities and a particularly disturbing scene upstairs. Tension in the courtroom reached its breaking point. Prince mentioned the address. It matched one already confirmed by forensic evidence earlier in the trial. That was when Diddy snapped. That's a lie, he yelled, leaping to his feet. His voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls, startling even the courtroom bailiffs. The reaction was immediate. Security moved toward him. His attorneys scrambled, trying to steady him. One of them whispered sharply, "Sit down." But Diddy couldn't contain himself. He wasn't even there. That never happened, he shouted again, louder this time. The judge slammed his gavel repeatedly. Mr. Combs, control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt. The courtroom descended into chaos. Jurors looked stunned. Two appeared visibly shaken. Later, a courtroom sketch artist revealed that she had to redraw Diddy's face 3 times during the outburst. His expressions were changing so violently and rapidly. Order was eventually restored, and the judge instructed the prosecution to pause the recording. Diddy sat at the defense table, breathing heavily. His hands shook. The flawless image of a billionaire mogul, controlled, powerful, untouchable, had shattered. Now, before the eyes of the jury, he appeared as something entirely different. A man unraveling, cornered, and desperately trying to hold on. Court insiders later confirmed what many had suspected. This was no accident. The timing of the tape had been strategic. After days of slow build-up and procedural groundwork, the prosecution had chosen this moment on purpose. Day 3, believing Diddy's defenses would be lowered. And they were right. He didn't need to testify. He didn't have to answer a single question. Yet Sean Diddy Combs showed the jury everything they needed to see: rage, guilt, and a complete loss of control, without ever stepping on the witness stand. And what's more chilling, Prince's recording hadn't even finished. After a brief recess to restore order following Diddy's outburst, the judge returned to the bench and instructed the prosecution to resume playback of the late musician's tape. But by then, everything had changed. The atmosphere was different, heavier. No whispers, no typing. Even the court sketch artist had put her pencil down. Every person in that courtroom was frozen, fixated on the speakers. The voice of a man no longer alive now held command over the most powerful room in entertainment law. And as Prince's voice returned, it carried a weight that no living witness could replicate. He spoke slowly and deliberately, as if he knew his words might never be heard again, unless something went terribly wrong. "What I've seen," he said, "isn't something you can just forget. They make it seem glamorous, but I've watched it destroy people." He was talking about parties. Again, not vague recollections, but detailed accounts. He listed locations, layouts of rooms, guests' names, even described the color of the furniture in certain lounges. Everything aligned with earlier testimonies, especially from Cassie Ventura and 2 other unnamed witnesses. But the most bone-chilling part of the tape? Prince's revelations about NDAs and hush payments. "I've seen the contracts," he said. "I've seen the money change hands. $2 million here, $1.5 there. And I've seen what happens when someone tries to leave. They disappear." He didn't mean they vanished physically, but rather musically, socially. Careers erased. Reputations buried. Connections severed. Gone. Diddy, still seated, was visibly trembling. His hands shook. His posture was rigid. He stared straight ahead, unblinking for nearly a full minute, according to a court reporter seated just behind him. One of his attorneys quietly offered him a tissue. He didn't take it. Then Prince dropped yet another bombshell. "I warned him at the Grammy after-party," Prince said. "I told him flat out, this is going to catch up to you." Diddy's alleged response? "You might be Prince, but I own this game. People like you don't change it. They get erased." That sentence hit the room like a thunderclap. Diddy didn't flinch, but his jaw clenched so tightly it was visible from rows away. A juror in the front shook her head slowly. Another leaned back in shock, hand covering her mouth. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a eulogy, a character assassination performed with surgical precision by someone with nothing to gain, no stake in the trial, and no way to be cross-examined. Prince, from beyond the grave, was painting a picture of Diddy not as a complicated man with flaws, but as a predator, a manipulator, a mastermind of silence and control. And this was only part of the tape. If you've ever witnessed a trial collapse in real time, this was that moment. The prosecution had methodically laid the groundwork over 4 days of testimony from Cassie Ventura. She spoke of years of coercion, secrecy, and psychological abuse. Her story lit the flame. But now, Prince's voice poured gasoline on the fire. And then came the confession of fear. "I didn't speak up when I was alive," Prince said, "because I saw what happened to the ones who did." He explained how whistleblowers were blacklisted, contracts terminated, tours canceled, award show invitations rescinded. This wasn't just power. It was fear. And that fear kept everyone quiet. Prince recounted one particular party where he noticed something deeply unsettling. "I saw cameras in the chandelier," he said. "I told the producer, and he just shrugged and said, 'That's just how it is.'" The implication was clear: blackmail, surveillance, psychological control. Not just enforced through wealth, but through secrets. Whispers of hidden footage and leverage had surrounded Diddy for years. But none of it had ever been substantiated until now. Prince didn't speculate. He documented. "I've got files," he declared. "Hard drives, tapes, photographs. All dated. All organized. I gave copies to 3 people. If anything happens to me, check with them." With those words, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. For the first time in this high-stakes federal trial, it wasn't the prosecution or the defense that held power. It was a voice from the dead, carefully revealing a world built on fear, deception, and unspoken rules. And the jury was listening. This was no longer just a recording. It had transformed into something far more powerful, a whistleblower's blueprint, and made perfectly clear why Diddy had lost control earlier that day. He knew what this was. He likely recognized specific details only someone deep within his inner circle could have known. The accuracy of the tape, the way it lined up seamlessly with the prosecution's existing timeline. It was too precise to dismiss. As the recording reached its final moments, Prince said something that may haunt this courtroom long after the trial ends. I've spent my life trying to protect my music, but now I realize it's the people who needed protection, and no one was doing it. Not really. Not when it mattered. Then came a soft click. The audio stopped. Silence filled the room. No one moved. The courtroom remained frozen, suspended in the gravity of what had just played out. Then the prosecutor rose, her voice composed but resonant. No further questions, Your Honor. She didn't need to say anything more. Prince had done the heavy lifting from beyond the grave. As soon as the judge adjourned the session for the day, Diddy's legal team sprang into action. They filed an emergency motion to suppress the recording, arguing that its origin couldn't be independently verified, that the witness was deceased and therefore not subject to cross-examination, and that the audio was inherently prejudicial. But deep down they knew it was too late. The jury had heard it. Worse than that, they had seen Diddy unravel, emotionally, publicly, and irreversibly. Outside the courthouse, legal analysts were already reacting. You don't come back from something like that. One said on live TV. The jury didn't just hear damaging testimony. They watched the defendant break apart while listening to the voice of one of the most revered artists in history. Inside the courtroom, Diddy barely spoke after the recording ended. He remained hunched over the defense table, elbows pressed into the wood, his eyes locked on the floor. One of his attorneys leaned in to speak to him. Diddy nodded slightly, but offered no words in return. He looked smaller, diminished, like a man finally facing the weight of his own legacy. But perhaps the most damning moment of all didn't come from Prince's recording. It came from the jury box. As the judge dismissed the panel for the evening, 3 jurors lingered. They glanced back at Diddy. One of them shook their head slowly. Another looked visibly unsettled, eyes clouded with discomfort. You didn't need a transcript to understand what was happening. They had just witnessed something that would follow them long after the trial ended. Prince hadn't simply damaged Diddy's defense. He had shifted the direction of the entire case. And for Diddy, the most terrifying part was yet to come, because Prince had said there was more. As the courtroom settled into stillness after the final seconds of the tape, the full weight of Prince's words began to descend like a fog. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. His tone was mournful, measured, deliberate. There was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion, resolve, and something final. The last thing Prince said on the recording, right before it cut off, was this: "If anything happens to me, make sure this gets to the right people. This isn't just about protecting myself. It's about protecting the ones who never got to speak." No music followed. No signature falsetto. No poetic ending. Just silence. And that silence was deafening. When the recording ended, it was as though the oxygen had been sucked from a courtroom. No one clapped. No one whispered. Even the judge's gavel didn't strike immediately. For several long seconds, everyone simply sat, still stunned. The judge finally glanced down his notes, looked toward the jury, and took a deep, deliberate breath before continuing. His next words were calm, but firm. "You're not to consider the source's death as evidence of truth or guilt. You must evaluate the content in context with the full record." But anyone watching the jurors' faces could already tell. That warning had come too late. They weren't just processing testimony anymore. They were living it, feeling it, absorbing every word as if it were their own memory. The jurors' expressions had shifted. The air in the courtroom had shifted. And Diddy, once the magnetic center of attention, now sat motionless, almost ghost-like. His hands rested on the table, unmoving. His face was expressionless. The fire in his eyes had flickered out. For the first time in the trial, he didn't look like a billionaire mogul fighting to clear his name. He looked like a man on the verge of collapse, physically, emotionally, and legally. Though the judge had officially adjourned the court for the day, it didn't feel like anyone truly left. The gallery emptied in slow, stunned movements. People drifted out, dazed, like survivors of a disaster they couldn't yet articulate. Outside, the press erupted. Reporters tossed around words like unprecedented, game-changer, and career-ending. Legal analysts on streaming networks scrambled to dissect what had just occurred. Some wondered aloud if this single recording, the voice of a man who couldn't be cross-examined, might tip the balance of the entire trial. But perhaps the most critical shift had already happened. Not in the law, in the story. Diddy was no longer just a defendant. He wasn't simply accused. He was now named by someone the world adored, trusted, and mourned. And that trust? It couldn't be undone. It couldn't be challenged on the stand. It couldn't be discredited through cross-examination. Jurors are instructed to judge only the evidence, to set emotions aside, to weigh facts. But no one in that room could unhear Prince's voice, detailing parties, naming names, describing manipulation, and pleading for the world to listen. And no one could unsee what happened when Diddy's mask cracked and fell. What unfolded in that courtroom on day 3 wasn't just the introduction of a new piece of evidence. It was a psychological unraveling in real time. A man who had ruled the industry for decades, flawless, composed, untouchable, was suddenly twitching, sweating, muttering. Jurors saw him bolt upright when a specific party date was mentioned. They saw him lose control, screaming across the room that Prince was lying, until the judge threatened to hold him in contempt. But it wasn't the explosion that hurt him most. It was what followed. The silence. Diddy never recovered. Not emotionally. Not physically. Not legally. He remained slouched in his chair, shoulders sunken, occasionally burying his head in his hands. His power, once unmistakable, had all but vanished. And the jury? They were no longer watching the prosecution or the defense. They were watching him. That's the moment prosecutors dream of. The shift. The irreversible pivot. It's one thing to present compelling evidence. It's another to spark a transformation, when jurors go from passive listeners to emotionally invested participants, from skeptical to certain. And that's exactly what happened. Psychologists refer to this as anchor bias, when a single, impactful moment becomes the lens through which all future information is filtered. From that moment forward, every piece of defense testimony would be evaluated not on its own merit, but against Prince's recording and Diddy's collapse in response to it. One juror was seen wiping away tears. Another had his hands clasped together, not like someone resting, but like someone praying. Whatever story the defense thought they were telling, it had been completely overpowered by a voice that couldn't be challenged and a defendant who had stopped performing. The next morning, court resumed, but it didn't feel the same. There was a tension in the room, not from anticipation, but from suspicion. Whispers had already begun. Were there more recordings? The world had long speculated about the contents of Prince's legendary vault, said it contained hundreds of unreleased songs and personal archives. But now, a new theory surfaced. Perhaps it wasn't all just music. Perhaps Prince had been documenting something bigger. An insider from the prosecution's team, speaking off the record, said it plainly. We believe Prince was building a record of what he saw. And this may not be the only thing he left behind. The entertainment industry reeled at the possibility. Who else might be mentioned? What other names were locked away? Just how far did Prince's concerns really go? One thing was now undeniable. This trial was no longer just about Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. It had become something far greater. A reckoning. This is no longer just about freak-offs, NDAs, or alleged past abuse. It has evolved into something much larger, a public reckoning of the very culture Diddy helped create and protect for decades. Thanks to Prince, that culture now has a voice of resistance. Sources confirm that investigators are actively pursuing new subpoenas tied to Prince's estate. They're searching for hard drives, audio tapes, and handwritten notes he may have left behind. If these materials are authenticated, they could lead to fresh investigations, new charges, and the possible implication of other powerful individuals once thought to be beyond accountability. Meanwhile, Diddy's legal team is scrambling to contain the fallout. They filed motions to suppress the Prince recording, arguing that it unfairly biases the jury. But the judge has already deemed the audio admissible. And even if it's tossed out later, the impact has already landed. The public heard it. The jury heard it. Diddy heard it, and visibly broke down. As the trial moves into its next chapter, one question dominates every conversation. What else could be hidden inside Prince's legendary vault? And more urgently, who might be exposed next? Because if Day 3 cracked the surface, what lies ahead may just tear the industry wide open.